We just announced the Aliro Quick Start. It's a bundle of hardware and software. We pick the hardware, the lasers, the photon detectors, some other components that you need, and we can bring that to your enterprise and deploy it. You can start to use an entanglement-based quantum network and see what you can do with it.
To modify a Feynman quote, I can safely say that no one understands quantum networking? I'm only half kidding, but the definition does mean different things to different folks. Sometimes the best way to solidify a concept is to bring it to the real world. Find out how you can experience quantum networking today and how it's already interconnecting different modalities of quantum computers in this episode of the Post-Quantum World. I'm your host, Konstantinos Karagiannis. I lead quantum computing services at Protiviti, where we're helping companies prepare for the benefits and threats of this exploding field. I hope you'll join each episode as we explore the technology and business impacts of this post-quantum era. Our guest today is the CEO of Aliro Quantum, Jim Ricotta. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And I have to say, this is the first time we had an Emmy winner on the post-quantum world. So I have to start with your background before we get to the company. So if you want to tell us a little bit about what you've done before Aliro.
Sure. Well, I've been in tech my whole career since I got an electrical engineering degree way back when. And I've been with a number of high growth companies like Sun Microsystems, and Avid Technology was the one where we basically invented, digital video and audio editing back in the 90s. And a team of us shared the technical Emmy for development of the Avid Media Composer. And then I moved from digital media toward networking in the late 90s, because of course, once you have digital media on computers, what do you want to do? You want to send it over networks. And so you may recall the beginnings of streaming media.
Oh, yeah.
And I started a company back in 1998 that had a new way to do streaming media that was much more, you may recall back in the late 90s, the streaming media was literally the size of a postage stamp. And if you do a startup, if you're a startup CEO, you have to have kind of a outlandish claim that you make that gets picked up everywhere. So mine was in 1999 was TV quality video on your PC. And people thought that was the craziest thing that they had ever heard. But of course, it happened a few years later. And that got me into networking. And that company was acquired by Cisco Systems, where I learned a lot more about networking. And I worked there for a few years. And by the time we get to Aliro, which started back in 2020, this is my fifth startup as the CEO. All of these were deep tech startups. And obviously, Aliro is a deep tech startup pioneering quantum networking.
Yeah, and luckily, TV only had a resolution of 320 by 240, so that wasn't really that big a goal to accomplish.
It seemed like quite a reach back then.
But now we've definitely delved into new areas here. So it sounds like you were always very focused about bringing things to the real world. This wasn't just like imaginary pie in the sky. Stuff. And that's why I wanted to have you on, because you're interested in bringing quantum networking to the real world. And there's technically a version of what we're going to talk about today that you could call as being in production, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So that's exciting stuff, because a lot of people at quantum networking, they get confused. They think it's just, hundreds of years away or whatever. So let's back up a moment. And if you can maybe just explain what quantum networking it is, and how it differs from maybe like quantum key distribution that people might have heard of.
Yeah, okay, sure. So what we do at Aliro is we're building a software stack for general purpose quantum networking. So quantum networking, in our vision, it's got to be useful for more than just one thing. It can be used to generate keys. It can be used to connect quantum computers. It can be used to network quantum sensors. What we're doing at Aliro, it's just like TCP/IP for the classical networking world, right? It's not a single purpose thing. You can use it for many different applications, many of which we haven't thought of yet. Just like with classical networking, we never would have thought of Uber or Airbnb or what have you. So with quantum networking, you're using individual photons. You're creating entangled pairs of photons. And you're using them to convey information from one party to another. And those parties could be individuals like you and me trying to share a message securely, or those two endpoints could be quantum computers, where you want to network quantum processors together to get better scale. I'm sure some of your guests have talked about that, and every quantum computer company in the world, I think, is working on or thinking about something like that. So in quantum networking, some of the great things about it are we can use the same fibers that are in the ground today, the same telecom wavelengths for these photons. We don't need absolute zero temperatures. We can operate at room temperature. The hardware that makes the entangled pairs of photons is off the shelf. They're lasers that have existed for many, many years that do this. You also need some single photon detectors to make quantum networking using entanglement work, and those are off-the-shelf items. So in a lot of ways, quantum networking is easier you mentioned a million years. In a lot of ways, quantum networking is easier to implement than quantum computing is. And you can get very useful. You think about it. So we use our laser to generate thousands or even millions of pairs of entangled photons per second. You and I share them, and we can agree on keys. We can even exchange data that way. I can pass messages to you, files to you that way. And, it's pretty simple. We don't need a complex setup. Again, we don't need absolute zero conditions. We don't need to maintain these qubits for a long time. All we do is we're going to perform one operation. I'm going to send you one of my pairs, one half of the pair. We're going to perform measurements, and this way we can communicate. So that's what quantum networking is all about.
So when we use something like this, are we creating a shared key that we agree on? And then from that point forward, it's just normal TCP/IP?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, again, as I say, with quantum networking using entanglement, there's lots of applications you can put on top of it. The most basic is let's agree on a key, and this gets you past the issue that I'm sure all your listeners know about by now, which is Q-Day, which is the asymmetric key exchange that we use to establish the symmetric key. The secure key is vulnerable to quantum computer attack, and maybe even just plain old supercomputer or AI attack. So how do you get away from RSA and Diffie-Hellman? You can use an entanglement-based network to agree on keys, and by doing it this way, there's no possibility of eavesdropping, because again, as I'm sure your listeners are aware, if Eve gets between us and grabs one of those photons and measures the quantum state, the state's collapsed, it's gone, and you're going to know that. You're going to know that you didn't get that entangled. You're getting there's loss on the line, and so we use a concept called quantum bit error rate, so that if there's enough loss between you and I in exchanging entangled photons, we know there's something wrong. We know there's someone is eavesdropping on us, and we're going to take countermeasures and switch to a different channel. But not only can we, so in your first use case that you asked me to describe, we use the quantum network, the entanglement-based network. We agree on keys. They're symmetric keys. They can be any length we want. They could be 256-bit or 512 or longer. And then we use, as you say, we're back to the classical channel, TCP/IP. We use that AES, probably symmetric key, to encrypt our data. And the AES encryption is not considered vulnerable to a quantum computer attack. Partly the reason for that is you can just keep making the key longer and longer, right? Mm-hmm. But in the near future, when we can get better entanglement rates, we can actually use the quantum channel to agree on the data and skip the key part. And using a quantum network, again, there's no way to eavesdrop on it. And we're really not, the cool thing about it is we're really not today I send bits to you, right? And someone can listen and copy the bits and try to decode them later, maybe harvest now, decrypt later is the term. But with this quantum entanglement network, we're going to use entangled photons to agree on a set of bits. Maybe it's a key, or maybe it's a file or a message. And we've never sent the actual data over this fiber, over the free space link. So that's the really cool thing. It's really kind of the magical thing about quantum networking.
for that first use case, you would be using some kind of fiber to create this entangled pair. So you're replacing BB84 or any other QKD protocol with this protocol.
That's correct. There are existing protocols well studied for entanglement-based networking. BBM92 is one of them, which was actually developed by some of the same people, the BBs from BB84. There's another one called E91. And these are different protocols. Our software implements them. And what we're trying to do at Aliro is these protocols have existed in physics labs and national labs for a long time. But what we're doing is we're a bunch of people that have quantum physics backgrounds, and we also have networking backgrounds. I described that I worked at Cisco. I've got people on my team who worked at Juniper Networks and Ericsson and Nokia, Lucent. So we're building a commercial grade stack that your AT&T or your Verizon or your Lumen or whoever could deploy to implement an entanglement-based network. So we're taking these things out of the lab and making them commercially scalable.
Okay. In that use case, you would have the key on, I guess, a fiber type network, and then you can do whatever you want because you have the key.
That's right. You would that fiber connectivity, or it could be free space. This entanglement works over. You may know the Chinese have a satellite that
Sure.
can share entangled photons between two places on the ground that are a long way apart. So it could be free space or it could be fiber, but you're using this quantum channel, if you will, to carry the entangled photons that you and I use to agree on a key. And then we could use the same fiber and a different wavelength, or we could use a different fiber that's probably running at many, many hundreds of gigabits per second. We give our key to the hardware encryptor, for example, we support the Cisco SCIP protocol, which is the way that Cisco routers get keys, and then those hardware encryptors, decryptors, are running the symmetric key at that line speed, which that's the way that bulk data gets moved these days, right?
So I like to think of it as kind of like an out of band key generation.
That's a good way to think about it for right now. Yeah.
Yeah, out of band. And you're envisioning other use cases where the band itself is the transmission mode, right?
Sure. I mean, the obvious thing is, if you can, let's say that, you can, so we're still conveying bits to each other at the end of the day. When we both measure our entangled photon, we get a bit, we get a 1 or a 0. And then later through the protocol, we figure out which ones we use the same measurement basis and which ones we didn't. And therefore we know which of the bits that we agree on. So if you're running at tens of thousands of entanglements per second, that's probably only enough for the key, because again, our classical channel is running at 100 gigabits per second.
Sure.
But once you get up to maybe hundreds of thousands of entangled pairs per second, or 500,000, 1 million, 5 million, now you can start to actually use the entanglement channel to actually send the message. And that's why, the big difference between QKD and what we're doing is it's not a single purpose network. It's you and I could use the network for keys. Someone else could use it for data, and again, we can go into a data center and with the same Aliro software, we can connect up quantum computers. In fact, one of our first customers is the Air Force, and they have a program to network together a superconducting quantum computer from Rigetti with an ion trap one from IonQ. So they're going to connect superconducting to ion trap qubits, and the Aliro software can do that.
Okay, so now I have to ask you about that.
Yeah. Because, it's pretty intriguing, doesn't it?
Yeah, because one of the biggest hopes of quantum networking for me is this idea of interconnect and making multiple quantum computers work as one. I just don't know if we ever scale without that, really.
That's right.
So can you share any details about that? Like how are they overcoming that? Because they're two different modalities.
And maybe the follow-up would be with I mentioned our chief product officer, Eric Ostby, is going to be at the show in New York. He spent 5 years at Google Quantum as the head of product there. He's got a PhD in electrical engineering, and then he spent some years at Rigetti. So he knows a lot about this problem. And, basically, there's transduction involved. So you've got to get from, a superconducting qubit to a photon that's in the range of what can go over an optical fiber. And the same thing with the ion, the qubit that's on the ion. You have to get a visible photon, and then you can entangle two qubits from, the different, you can use a swapping protocol to entangle qubits from the different machines, and you've got a networked, you can network your processors that way. So it involves again, it's entanglement, the same thing we do for the key agreement, but it also has some transduction steps to get the qubit, from the modality that it starts in to the one that can travel over the fiber and then back to the one that it's going to, right?
Yeah, this is kind of huge. It's something I'd really love to hear more about as it progresses. And the show you mentioned before, the Quantum and AI show in New York City, as we're recording this, is tomorrow. Inside Quantum Technology does that show every year, and this year, there's going to be a focus on quantum and AI. Are they hoping for any specific use case out of that? Because I'm assuming they're going to have to develop a lot of code around this, right? A lot of ways to handle.
It's mostly what you said, Konstantinos. It's scaling quantum computing, and the one part of scaling is just having more qubits to use for your algorithm. Another part of scaling is, as you know, the different modalities of qubits have different characteristics. So if you could, just like in a classical computer, and I used to design classical computers a long time ago, there's the cache, and then there's the slower memory, and then there's the other, there's the registers, then the cache, then the slower memory, and your algorithm wants to use these things to its advantage. So you can imagine using the ion trap machine to hang on to intermediate results for longer while you spin through some other part of the algorithm on the superconducting quantum computer, which has much faster gate times. Now, when that's done, you maybe do a swap, and you bring this in, and right. So there's computer architecture reasons why you'd want to use two different qubit modalities in the same big quantum computer.
What a fun 2024 it's been. First I was excited about all the logical qubits we started getting.
Yeah.
And now you're telling me that one of your first big customers is using this technology to do interconnect between two different modalities of quantum computer. That is, what a beautiful end to the year. I got to say, that is just magic.
It's very exciting.
Do you know if they're going to be doing a paper or anything around that, or will it be kind of like closed doors after?
No, the Air Force Research Lab is pretty open about the things they work on, and there probably will be papers. Yeah, probably a number of them. We just got started in August, so we're just getting rolling. And by the way, so they licensed the Aliro software, including our quantum network simulator. So we built this simulator because we needed it for our own development of quantum networking protocols. And it's turned out to be a product that a lot of our prospects can use, because you think about it, okay, I know a lot about classical networking. I own a classical network, whether I'm a bank or whether I'm a telco. And I've heard about this quantum networking, and I think it's very, very important. You may know that Cisco Systems invested in Aliro last year because they think this is a hugely important area. So how do I get started? Well, with our quantum network simulator, you can simulate everything from, at a high level, the traffic on a network and the number of nodes and all that kind of quantum repeaters. And you can also simulate all the way down to the physics of the fiber you're going to use and the loss and the dispersion and the way the lasers behave and the way that the photon detectors behave. How often do they have a dark count? How often do they, how much time do they need to reset? And so it's a very powerful simulator, and we license this, and we, as I said, we use it internally. And so that's the first thing that the Air Force Research Lab is doing, is they're going to simulate a lot of these, these components where we can build new component models to plug into the simulator framework. It's very open. We can also use different backends, like QTIP, I believe, and SERC to simulate the quantum operations. So the simulator is what they're starting with. They're going to simulate how this network might work, configure it different ways, and then they can start to actually plug the components together.
So for a use case like this, it doesn't sound like you have to worry too much about repeaters, really, I guess, right? Like it's close. The machines are close together for now, but one day they don't have to be, right? But it does make you wonder what kind of role do repeaters play in your whole solution?
Yeah. So you're correct that initially for networking quantum computers together, whether you're the Air Force Research Lab or Amazon Web Services Bracket or Microsoft Azure Quantum, you're probably going to do it in a data center, right? Mm-hmm. So you don't have the repeater bound is 100 kilometers, 60 kilometers, something like that. But it's critically important for the first use case I described, which is either key agreement or communication itself over using quantum entanglement, because we need to go longer than 60 or 80 kilometers. So the repeater is very, very important. And, what you need to build a quantum repeater is, quantum memories plus some software wrapped around it. I'm sure I heard you had Connect on the show, right? Mm-hmm. We know them well, and they have a quantum memory. There's other companies building quantum memories, startups. There's one in Chicago. There's one in Cambridge here in the Boston area. And so I think this is the router of the quantum networking era, right? The repeater. So it's going to be critically important. And we're thrilled. Again, our strategy at Aliro is the reason we built a software platform and not hardware and software is we come from the networking world. We saw networking grow up, and it started with individual stacks from each company. IBM had SNA and DEC had DECnet and Apple had AppleTalk and like that. And then it turned into a layered approach where you could swap out the hardware at the bottom. You could use the Broadcom chip, or you could use the Intel chip, or you could use, something else. And we see that happening in quantum over time. There's a lot of innovation in hardware. Different kinds of quantum memories are being built. Some of them are based on gases. Some of them are based on vacancy centers in crystals. Some of them are based on other things. And we already talked about qubit modalities. So with the Aliro approach, we can work with repeaters that use these different technologies. And that, to us, that's a key part of our business and our technology strategy, because these days, if you talk to a telco, which we do all the time, there's no way they're going to buy a quantum network to run a service on that comes from one company. That's not how they do it today. They have mixed multi-vendor environments, and that's what they want, and it makes a lot of sense. So the repeaters are critical, and the fact that we can work with lots of different ones is one of Aliro's real strengths.
So right now you end up buying, I guess, software and then some hardware that you work with, right? The sources for the photons, it becomes like a bundle. Like that you partner up to create. That's
right. And in fact, our role, I think over time, we become a pure, SaaS software vendor. In the early days, the customers want us to come in and put it together, integrate it together for them. Tell us what hardware we need. Here's what we're trying to do. Again, we start with a simulation, and then we pick out the hardware, and then we bring the parts together and put it together. And we just announced a couple weeks ago an actual offering like that. It's called the Aliro Quick Start, and it's a bundle of hardware and software. We picked out the hardware, the lasers, the photon detectors, some other things, some other components that you need, and that comes with our software. And we can bring that to your campus and your enterprise and deploy it. And you can find out, you can start to use an entanglement-based quantum network and see what you can do with it.
And it's still in the routing days though, right? Because there's no actual physical way to do the repeating and all that good stuff yet.
Repeaters exist. They're not, there's no commercial one yet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Probably the closest one is QNX, I think, but they're coming. I mean, they're going to pop on the scene again. It's different than quantum computing where, if you have some type of a quantum memory that can hold, that can take a photon in, hold that quantum state, emit a photon a little bit later. It doesn't have to. It's an easier problem than a qubit that's got to maintain a clean quantum state over 10,000 operations. Right? It's very different than that.
Yeah. No, this is great though. I was impressed that they're actually in production versions of this, and of course the Air Force example is a great one. Yeah. So, what do you think is the biggest challenge then to scaling this up? Is it just waiting for the right hardware to catch up with you?
I think part of it is just, there's a huge amount of interest out. We've got we've got all the major banks and a lot of government agencies and the major telcos talking to us and interested in what we're doing. I think it just takes some experience. One thing that doesn't exist today that Aliro has produced is, enterprises and carriers have to be able to manage a network, any network, whether it's classical or quantum. They have to be able to add components, remove components, verify performance, get billing information, all this stuff. So we're building all this stuff into our software. And so we've just got to get out there and the prospects, they're moving pretty quickly, but they've got to learn that we can have a quantum network. It's not science fiction. We can use entanglement, and we just have to get some experience, using it and making sure it's reliable and can meet all our requirements for offering a service.
So I guess one future use case that would impress everyone is one that you've alluded to, this idea of a connection that is just pure quantum, and that's it. We're getting a high enough bit rate that we can do something more than send the equivalent of a text message, right?
That's right. And it's unhackable. I mean, we've used mathematics for the last, 50 years of networking to protect data. And we're getting to the end of that. And now what we're talking about here is a complete, sea change where we're using the laws of physics. And there's no way around the laws of physics. If we're exchanging entangled photons and we're measuring them and information is, you and I can agree on information that way, who's going to get in between? There's no way to break it. You can't intercept it, feed it to your quantum computer or your AI. There's just none of that. So it's a totally different, it's really going to shake things up. And in fact, Gartner just added quantum networking to its new enterprise networking hype cycle. So it's for the first time, it's recognizing and telling enterprise CISOs and CIOs that this is something to watch. And I mentioned Cisco invested in our company in Aliro, and they gave us as their board observer, Bill Gartner, who's their SVP of the optical business. So it's a multi-billion-dollar optical business at Cisco. And he'll tell you that quantum networking is coming, and he gets asked about it by his big customers. And, Aliro is part of the solution.
It's really a one-time pad. Ultimately, it's sure. The ultimate one-time pad with the ultimate randomness that you could never hope to see a pattern in.
That's right. You can use it for OTP. Sure.
Yeah. So I just want everyone to really let that sink in. You would have something that you could never hope to see any kind of pattern in reverse. That's right. Anything like that. So that's pretty remarkable. And I love to hear the technology being used, like I said, in that use case. That's such a big headline that I'm quite surprised people aren't talking about all the time. I mean, that's a major deal, connecting two types of quantum computers together. When networking first came out, years ago in the 90s, let's say, for all intents and purposes, people started caring about it. It was still this, like, I don't know. Do you remember the vibe was like that it's not that important, that it's almost like, oh, this is this weird thing. It's complicated. It's annoying. It's hard. Only a few people want it. It
was a little bit gimmicky at the beginning.
Yeah. It was. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, everything is networked all the time, So can you think of anything that like governments and industry should be collaborating on to accelerate quantum networks? I mean, it just seems like so many parts should be played by so many different actors,
So do you know about the EPB quantum network in Tennessee?
No.
Take a look at it. Google EPB quantum network. You'll find it. And what that is, it's a quantum network test bed that was built by the electric utility down there in Chattanooga called EPB. And they had already built, speaking of networking, they already used all their fiber. They placed fiber underneath their service area for protecting their electric grid, and they realized they could provide tens of gigabits per second to every home and business in the area. And now their next project was the quantum network, and that quantum network, it's got, I want to say, a dozen nodes. They use the fiber that's under the ground there in Chattanooga. It's probably a total of 20 kilometers of fiber. The Aliro software runs it. There's 3 or 4 different hardware vendors that provide the lasers and the photon detectors and the other things, polarization compensators and other things. And anyone, any researcher, any company can go to that network and rent time on it and experiment with quantum networking. There's only one network like that in our country right now, the EPB quantum network. We should have dozens of those networks, right? We should have one at every one of the national labs. We should have one in lots of different places. And that's what government and industry can do together. I think if the combination of the NSF and the Department of Energy and maybe the DoD, maybe others can fund these quantum networks, which aren't really that costly, because again, you don't need a deal fridge, you don't need exotic stuff. You just need fiber in the ground, which a lot of these places have already, and you need the some of the hardware and the Aliro software. We should have many more of those test beds. They have them over in Europe, and they're active in Singapore, Australia. I know of a lot of different places where they're building these networks, government sponsored, and we should do more of that here. EPB is a private company, they're doing it.
Yeah, it's a big part of the push also in like the Chicago area.
That's another good one. Yeah. And again, and we've talked to those folks, and we would love to help them get that thing up and running. EPB is the only one I know of that it is, there's DCQNet, there's Chicago Quantum Exchange, but EPB is the only one where right now you and I can go there. We can sign a contract, and we can bring our new quantum memory, connect it to the fiber, and we can use the Aliro software to configure everything and run it. And that's the only place. And it's actually a good business for them. They have recouped their investment in the first couple of years, and it's a great business. So that's called Quantum Network Lab as a Service. It's a brilliant business idea by EPB, and others should take up the same idea.
Well, there you go. For anyone who thinks quantum networking is complete vaporware, you heard all the productions that's happening right now. And so would you then, before I let you go, would you say that you see a bright future for folks who want to maybe start going down a career path in quantum networking? Do you think it's going to be that explosive? For
sure. We've hired a few people in the last year who got their PhD in quantum networking. So there's places like University of Illinois and Purdue and others that are that are training people in this new field. And in my view, as I said, this is my fifth startup as the CEO. And the reason I wanted to do this one is that this is the future of networking. This is a whole new world. And a lot of it is different. It's super powerful. You can do things you could never imagine doing with our classical network. And that was pretty amazing, right? Over the last 30 years or so. So I think it's going to be a huge, as you said, once you hit the repeater, we're all looking, what is the quantum internet? It's when we get to the point where not only can we network quantum computers in the data center, and we can have communication links, but we can connect computers across the world. And now we've got the quantum internet, and that's not that far away. And there's a lot of things to be invented and perfected. And so I think it's a huge career opportunity for people.
Great. Thanks for that little optimistic note at the end too. Good luck with everything you're doing, and I can't wait to have you back on to tell me that you guys have achieved full fault-tolerant computing by chaining all these systems together.
We'd be happy to tell you about it.
Now it's time for Coherence, the Quantum Executive Summary, where I take a moment to highlight some of the business impacts we discussed today, in case things got too nerdy at times. Let's recap. Aliro has built a software stack for general-purpose quantum networking. Along with off-the-shelf hardware like photon detectors, Aliro's code can work with entangled photons to transmit data via fiber or free air. Speeds are still limited, so the most common use for this type of transmission is what you might have heard of with QKD. You use entangled photon pairs to make measurements and build a message that becomes a key for use over traditional networks. This protects the critical first steps of a public key encapsulation method against eavesdropping or harvest now, decrypt later attacks. There's nothing to reverse. In addition to such out-of-band security applications, Aliro hopes to increase the speed of quantum communication to provide true one-time pad transmission of messages with the photons themselves. Intercepting these messages would result in unreadable output. As the speed of these transmissions increases and hardware such as quantum repeaters starts to appear on the market, we will have the basis for full quantum networking. But that's not to say Aliro is not used in production use cases. The most exciting one is the Air Force project, in which the software interconnects qubits from two different modalities or types of quantum computers. In this case, superconducting from Rigetti and trapped ion from IonQ. Each modality has its strengths, and combining them with Interconnect could, in theory, provide for more flexibility in running different types of algorithms and circuits. I've often said on the show that the path to scalable quantum computing probably lies through Interconnect. Combined with logical qubits arriving in recent months, we have the building blocks of fault-tolerant systems. That does it for this episode. Thanks to Jim Ricotta for joining to discuss quantum networking. And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to Protiviti's The Post-Quantum World and maybe leave a review to help others find us. Be sure to follow me on all socials at Constant Hacker. That's Constant with a K, Hacker. You'll find links there to what we're doing in quantum computing services at Protiviti. You can also DM me questions or suggestions for what you'd like to hear on the show. For more information on our quantum services, check out Protiviti.com or follow Protiviti Tech on Twitter and LinkedIn. Until next time, be kind and stay quantum curious.